This is Red Ice Radio. My name is Henrik Palmgren, and it is good to have you with us. A warm welcome to all our regular listeners, and of course to everyone who is tuning in for the first time. Okay, so today we have Clif with us from halfpasthuman.com. He is behind something called the WebBot, a computer program basically written to predict trends and upcoming future events. And we are going to talk about the WebBot today, how it got started. We're going to discuss future studies and the shape of things to come. So with that, welcome to the program, Clif. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, no problem at all. Glad to be here.
You know, we've gotten quite a few requests from our listeners to get you on the program to talk about your work over at halfpasthuman.com, the WebBot and so forth. So I think that many will be familiar with you and your work and the story in general. But for those of us who don't know that much about it, maybe you can give us an overview, a quick kind of background on what the WebBot is, what it does, a little bit how it works, and also I guess then in terms of how it can help us to predict future events, Clif.
Sure. The basic concept is that all humans are psychic in some degree, just the way all humans are short or tall in some degree. And the second corollary to that is that the humans are psychic, and whether they know it or not, they're leaking out some of their psychic impression in their particular choice of words in casual everyday conversations, including those conversations that are expressed on the internet, and that we are able, with software that goes out and reads such conversations, to gather in all of these millions of psychic impressions, boil them down to a thick syrupy mass, and skim the top of it for forecasts.
And it's you and George who are basically behind this program, but you're the original author of the code, so to speak. Is that right?
That's correct. I started thinking about language and how we store it in a computer age when I was involved as a consultant to some very large software companies here in the Northwest, who in turn had me be a consultant to some of their clients back in the old Rust Belt part of our country, and that is to say the auto industry and so forth, because we were storing language in huge amounts, but basically it was the same words stored over and over and over again, and I knew there had to be a better way to think about language, its storage and use in a computer age, and one thought led to another, and this was in maybe 1993 or 94. I started thinking about the idea of how language shifts over time, which led to an emotional quantifier for language, which led to the idea that, well, maybe those emotional quantifiers could be captured and used for specific purposes. The original idea was to forecast emerging interest in stocks and so forth, and therefore be able to arrive at a conclusion before the trend actually became manifest within the markets themselves. So basically it started off as a money-making scheme gone awry.
There you go. And so you got an interesting, I guess, side effect of this then. So how do you go about it? Do you search for specific keywords, or what is the nature of this thing, so to speak?
It's actually about 340 some odd executable programs at this stage, most of them written in Prolog for the data processing itself. There's, maybe, 50, 80 or something like that programs written in C and Perl that actually go out and do the data gathering. They take as their seed list about 300,000 search terms that we've identified as the descriptor set of archetypes that we're interested in from our lexicon of 1.7 million words that have been defined with emotional parameters. So they take these 300,000 seed terms and they go hunting, and we really don't care about the seed term per se. We just because all we do really is note where it was found in the time. But then the process is to actually bring back the words that are around it to see what shifts have occurred since the last time we got that seed term in that same spot. And so really what we're looking at is the shift of language over time. And it's kind of interesting because it parallels how language evolves in natural human use, in the sense of we're always creating new slang, and the more emotional stress we're under, the more new slang we're going to create. I believe that slang is in essence a side effect, if you will, of the fact that all humans are psychic. And it's not that we're looking at slang per se. I just cite it as an example of how in a macro level language changes over time within our species. It need not. You could, for instance, imagine a species where language was relatively static except for the invention of new words to accommodate new technology, for instance, and that's really the only need for a new word. However, in our species, we think our emotions are not those of our parents, and we need new terms to express our emotions in our context as we come into the world. And so we invent slang and new uses for words, and language morphs over time fairly rapidly. Make sense?
Makes sense. And so how does the program actually filter this out and kind of make coherent sentences for you guys to read, or how do you go about searching in this information that the bots bring out?
It's very much more complex than that. I wish it did spit out the sentences. Then I wouldn't have to write the reports and the interpretation. I could just gather all those, paste them in a document. There you go.
Yeah.
No, what it does is it brings back words associated in a mind map, if you will, relating to high-level archetypes, primary, secondary, tertiary support for those archetypes, and then down ultimately into detail levels. So you think of it as like a pyramid. So the seed word comes back at the very top of that pyramid, and then associated with that might be 30 or 40,000 words going down to the detail level. And it's up to the humans that look at this model that we've devised that's a visual representation of all of this, to decide what a hot spot is, and then go and drill down into those 30 and 40,000 words and see if there's anything interesting there. So it's a little bit more complex than you might imagine.
Yeah.
A lot of it is based on the visual impression we get from our 3D IntelliCAD representation. Basically what I did was to take a free open source CADware, IntelliCAD, and then I wrote a Lisp program that uses 1 pixel per descriptor set and alters intensity, hue, and color based on the level of the shift involved in the language as a result of an emotional or a sum of emotional values. And so you actually look at little bright pixels, and it looks like a very chaotic aquarium, if you will.
That's interesting. And how could you, for instance, do you know if you could take this information and put it into another kind of filtering program? For instance, could you create like a tag cloud or something like that, where you actually see kind of keywords, and the bigger they are, the more resonance they carry, so to speak?
Yes, you could, but what prevents us from doing that is just the sheer volume we're dealing with. So we might read 100 million keyword instances in order to create a report. Of those 100 million, we'll probably discard 20 or 30 million for various different reasons, and we're left, say, with 70 million that are active or effective. And just representing that level of complexity pretty much bumps us out of most display formats. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And you mentioned emotional parameters. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. What do you mean with that?
I decided that way back in the early 90s, it just came to the conclusion that the reason we create slang is, as I said, is an emotional response to the world around us. So as we're growing up and we're teenagers, for instance, it doesn't matter what culture you're in, you find yourself in a situation where your emotions, in the context that you're experiencing them in your physical reality, is perceived to be different from your parents'. And so it is emotion that really drives the creation of new language and the use of language in new and interesting ways. This emotion could be the result of normal teenage angst, or it could be a collective social pressure because of oppression, or any number of factors. But nonetheless, there's an emotional quantifier to language. Not only does language intend to impart information, but it imparts information for humans in an emotional context. And we use it so often that we sort of become blind or immune to the emotional content of language at that very high level. So what I did was to go through and just created a scale that was initially a -1 to a +1, with 0 being the midpoint, and referenced it in 100th parts of each, and assigned an emotional value to emotions. So in other words, the word fear, I figured, well, that's a -1. and the word joy was a positive one, and I went through and did this with all of the emotions and the emotionally associated words. So on fear, it was frightened, afraid, etc., all of the various different synonyms. And then I used that emotional value as a sum to determine what's happening relative to language as it changed. But it's a little bit more complex than that, because the emotional values are put into a multidimensional array that's associated with each and every one of the words in our lexicon. This array tells us, for instance, if a word has more of an immediate impact on your life, but not so much a long-lasting one, or vice versa, and various different kinds of parameters.
That's very interesting.
Sort of makes sense.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. In a way, I guess you could say that what you guys are doing here is a very, very advanced form of Google Alerts, maybe? Would that be a fairly comparison to make here?
We were sort of, in a sense. We were there, 10 years before, and we're off in a really screwy direction. But that, I think, is a very fair comparison, yes.
And in one way, to me, it sounds like you guys are tapping into, I guess, the human collective unconscious in a way. It's almost like if we look at the World Wide Web as the mind of humanity as a whole, considering what we write about, what we talk about online and so forth, this becomes as a way of almost tapping into that. Would you say that that's correct?
I would say that's exactly correct. That was sort of the intent. That what we really wanted to get at was the bleeding edge of that unconscious to conscious transition, and the only place to really grab it in a text-based world was where the individual words were changing in the same sorts of conversation. So really, for instance, we spend a lot of our time hunting down conversations in bread baking forums, car repair, cooking, any of the ordinary things that you can imagine, because it's really there that all of the hidden archetypes emerge. Such places as conspiracy fora, political, religious, any of these areas are less fruitful for us because it's up in a conscious realm, and we're not really so much interested in that because that has a tendency to alter the psychic filter.
Would you say that from your point of view, the more people that are online on forums and write blogs, etc., the better it is and the more accurate it will become?
I believe that to be the case, and I'm rather concerned about the intention of places like Australia to filter and replace language with automated software, sort of this online instant censorship kind of thing. And then there's been real problems for us as